All right, welcome back. We are in Shanghai today, and I've got a flight to Hohhot. I think it's pronounced Hohhot. I'm not too sure. But also, I've got a power bank on me that I don't think I'm going to be able to take. Let's see if we lose this bad boy. I think we might, but we'll see. Yeah, let's touch on power banks as well.
Where are you going?
Hohhot. She was saying Hohhot? Hohhot. I think it's literally called Hohhot. Do we think there'll be good food after security or not? While that Simon looks for food, let's dive into power banks. You may have noticed that airlines around the world are cracking down on these. There's now bans, restrictions, and rules around taking them on board. We'll get into how this has ended up as a global game of regulatory whack-a-mole later in the video, but I want to start with an incident that was a bit of a wake-up call for the whole aviation industry. On January 28th, 2025, a power bank inside a passenger's carry-on bag ignited in the overhead bin of an Air Busan flight at Gimhae International Airport in South Korea. Luckily, the aircraft was taxiing when this occurred, because by the time anybody realized, the fire had already taken hold. The slides were deployed and all 176 people were evacuated successfully. But the plane, the A321 involved, was, quite obviously, from these images, a complete write-off. This incident sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. South Korea responded almost immediately. In March of 2025, they banned power banks from overhead bins entirely. If you have one, it must be kept in a protective pouch or transparent plastic bag and within arm's reach, under the seat or in a seat back pocket. Japan followed suit shortly after, in July of 2025, with all major Japanese airlines prohibiting overhead storage for all lithium power banks. And of course, China. China took an even harsher line. On June 28, 2025, their aviation regulator introduced a simple rule on all domestic flights. You can't carry a power bank on board unless it has this 3C safety mark. And that's already on top of the fact that in China, power banks are generally not allowed to be used in flight anyway. So if you don't have a 3C certified power bank, you lose it at the security checkpoint. Or will you? I was about to find out. But I guess, what even is this 3C mark? And why did it suddenly become an airport problem? Well, firstly, 3C is short for China Compulsory Certification. Basically, China's mandatory safety certification for products that could cause harm. And for over 2 decades, while phones were strictly regulated, portable batteries, power banks, weren't in this mandatory catalogue. This resulted in a massive market with wildly inconsistent quality. You have top-tier brands producing pretty safe and reliable power banks to this sort of no-name collection of rather sketchy and cheap power banks. In August of 2023, the regulations finally caught up. China's regulators added mobile power supplies, power banks, to the compulsory certification scope. There was a transition period, but by August 1st, 2024, power banks sold in China had to carry this 3C certification. Earning this mark isn't just paperwork. It requires passing the GB 31241 national standard. Rigorous abuse testing, including heavy impacts and puncture tests. Under even stricter rules introduced later, inspectors even video recorded themselves pulling test samples directly from production lines to prevent factory fraud. So China started cleaning up the production of power banks. But how did this turn into an aviation security issue? Well, before we get to that, let's first see if I lose my power bank here. Are they doing a good job?
I strongly reckon I will, but we'll see.
That was so swift. She's just like, sir, doesn't have the thing, and threw it in a bin. Rest in peace, power bank.
Our train is about to depart.
Yeah, they're not messing around. They're taking this pretty seriously. But why? Well, there's 2 major reasons. First, power banks are becoming a real problem on planes. Obviously, we had the Air Busan incident, but by early July of 2025, China's civil aviation regulator reported 15 onboard smoke or fire incidents linked to passenger power banks, roughly a doubling year on year. Second, and this was probably the tipping point for China to make this big move to ban all uncertified power banks, there was a scandal. In July of 2025, investigators revealed that Apex, a battery cell supplier located in the city of Wuxi, had been secretly cutting corners. Facing price wars, they reportedly substituted a critical separator material inside battery cells with a cheaper substandard alternative. This separator is a membrane preventing the anode and cathode from touching. If it fails, you get an immediate short circuit and thermal runaway. The thing catches fire. This swapped contaminated supply chains of top-tier brands. Over 1.2 million units from giants like Anker and Romos were identified as fire risks. Both brands recalled products, but China's Civil Aviation Administration couldn't rely on passengers knowing if their specific batch was safe. They needed a brute force filter. And so on June 28th, 2025, they implemented this ban on all non-3C certified power banks. Now, rather ironically here, this move may not actually catch all of the defective power banks out there. Both Anker and Romos are 3C certified brands, and their defective units are still out there in the wild. But it does change the baseline. It pushes the market towards traceable, tested products, and it also opens the door to something bigger. If accident rates keep rising, this could be the early stage of a much broader clampdown, even a potential outright ban. Power banks on planes may seem harmless, and all of these rules may appear overly cautious, but when you dig into it, these are quite possibly a disaster waiting to happen. But we'll get into why they're so potentially dangerous in a minute.
Egg bomb. Sounds delicious.
What a great spot to sit and enjoy some egg bomb.
You know what? It's got a fair amount of heft to it. First bite. Oh my god. That's like really good. It's like buttery, garlicky, tongue for both. If you're in China, get yourself some egg bomb.
Let's dive into why lithium-ion battery fires are quite dangerous, especially on planes when compared to more traditional fires. Let's call them ordinary combustible fires. An ordinary combustible fire follows the basic fire triangle. In order to burn, it requires fuel, oxygen, and heat. Fuel is the thing that's actually burning. Think things like fabric, plastics, jet fuel, or paper towels. Oxygen usually comes from the surrounding air. And heat is the thing that gets the party started. Whether that's an electrical fault, friction, a spark, or a rogue cigarette. Now, don't smoke, smoking's bad. This is for theatrical purposes only. Oh no, I dropped my cigarette. Why is it so hard to start a fire? As long as all three are present, the fire sustains itself. But if you remove just one, the fire will collapse. Oh no, I gotta step on it, don't I? That's why conventional fires are often controlled by smothering. This removes the oxygen. Cooling with water. This removes the heat. Or removing the fuel, which I just tried to do unsuccessfully, but this leaves the fire with nothing left to burn. Now, I was tempted to start a lithium battery fire for this video. I'm a big fan of doing stupid stuff for a YouTube video, but yeah, I don't think my neighbors would appreciate that, and they are actually kind of gnarly. So we're just gonna rely on FAA test footage for this next section. A lithium-ion battery fire breaks this fire triangle because the fuel and the heat source are inside the cell itself. And as it breaks down, it can generate its own oxidizers and vent flammable gases. In an ordinary fire, the fuel is external. Think paper, fabric, plastic, something you can remove or isolate. In a lithium-ion battery, the fuel is the battery itself. The electrolyte is flammable. The materials can break down into flammable gases. And once the reaction starts, you can't really take the fuel away. Then there's the second part of this. Conventional fires need oxygen from the air. Smother the fire and it dies out. Lithium-ion batteries don't work this way. Depending on the chemistry, they can vent a flammable gas mix that not only includes oxygen, but even hydrogen. Do we all remember the Hindenburg catastrophe? Anyway, this factor alone renders smothering useless and also means that if you do successfully knock down the flames, they can quickly reignite. And finally, the real big problem here is the heat inside the cells. In a normal fire, cooling with, say, water removes energy and slows combustion. But in a lithium-ion battery, heat is the trigger. When a cell overheats, materials inside break down and release energy. which creates more heat. That heat can push neighboring cells past their limits, and then they join in too. You end up with a chain reaction. One cell triggering the next, then the next, and you end up with this thing called thermal runaway. This is the key idea here. With lithium-ion battery fires, the flames are almost the sideshow. The real danger is the runaway reaction and the heat and gas it produces. So thermal runaway is the real problem here. These are not just standard fires. And that matters because most of aviation firefighting was built for the ordinary combustible fire we just talked about. The core tool in the cabin for decades was the handheld Halon 1211 extinguisher. Now, there's a whole other tangent here about Halon that I won't really go into, but it destroys the ozone layer. And it got phased out globally under the Montreal Protocol in 1994. This was that international move to eliminate the use of CFCs. In hindsight, that was a pretty impressive global feat, but aviation was able to keep on using Halon 1211, or as it's otherwise known as bromochloro-difluoromethane, under critical use exemptions for up to 30 years, because at least at the time, nothing else could as effectively put out fires on a per unit of weight basis. A very important metric for aviation. These days you'll hear about replacement agents like 2-BTP or Halotron BRX. Ridiculously cool names, but the key idea is the same. These fire extinguishers work so well because they chemically disrupt flames. Now please note here, I dropped chemistry in year 11, but I'll try my best to explain this here. If we think of this fire triangle as a self-sustaining loop, the heat provides the ignition energy, the fuel then reacts with oxygen, and that combustion releases more heat, which keeps the loop going. These halon-type agents work by grabbing the reactive radicals that the flame needs to keep going and turns them into less reactive molecules. This then causes the flame to collapse. It's rather nifty chemistry, really. But it basically all leads to the fire going out quite quickly. Here's the catch though. These extinguishers are amazing at collapsing flames, but they don't remove heat. And with lithium thermal runaway, as we've just learned, heat is the whole game. The main danger isn't always the flames you see. It's the insane heat and gas that's generated inside the cells that can keep on going even after the flames are knocked down. So the aviation world had to adopt a different solution for this new problem. Step 1 is still the extinguisher. Knock down any visible flames and stop the cabin itself from catching fire, because that's the immediate danger. But step 2 is the important bit. Crew then douse the device with any non-flammable liquid, ideally water, but if they need more, they'll literally raid the drinks trolley. Juice, soft drinks, whatever's non-flammable. Interestingly, ice, rather counterintuitively, has been found to increase the chance of more cells going into thermal runaway. This is because it doesn't move heat away from the cells efficiently. The goal here is purely thermodynamic. Flow liquids over the device, get into the hotspots, and carry all of that heat away quickly. This is how air crews today are taught to put out or at least control these thermal runaway events. Many long-haul aircraft now also carry fire containment bags. Heat-resistant bags specifically designed to deal with lithium battery fires. Products like the AVSAC, which is now carried on aircraft by over 100 airlines worldwide, are designed to contain a device that's gone into thermal runaway.
This one's not an AVSAC. This was $9 on Amazon, but you get the point.
Here's how they work. Once the initial flames are knocked down and the device is cool enough to handle with protective gloves, the crew places it inside this containment bag. The bag is then doused with water or other liquid, which gets absorbed by a special gel lining inside. This creates a cooling effect that continues to draw heat away from the device while it's sealed inside. The crew will then monitor the bag for the remainder of the flight. If there's any reignition, which can happen hours later, the bag contains it. It's not a perfect solution, nothing truly is with lithium battery fires, but it gives crews a fighting chance to manage the situation until the aircraft can land. Now, I don't know about you, but I find this all a little bit unsettling. Ordinary fires are something you can extinguish, but lithium incidents are something you can only manage. All of a sudden, all of these modern battery rules don't quite feel like airline paranoia anymore. If anything, after researching all of this, I'm probably the one that's becoming a little bit paranoid. All right, let's go to Hahot. I still don't know how to pronounce it. I just saw the screen that they've got going on there, and it had my picture from check-in or something.
哎，女士，我们找到座位先朝里。
Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Looking at this? If power banks are scary in the cabin, how are lithium batteries handled as cargo? It's one thing to deal with a power bank smoking in the cabin. At least you can see it, reach it, and start cooling it. But cargo is the opposite. It's out of sight and often inaccessible mid-flight. So the way that this is all handled is lithium batteries are classified as dangerous goods and shipped with UN numbers. UN 3480 is for lithium-ion batteries shipped on their own, bulk pallets of cells. UN 3481 is for batteries inside equipment. Think phones, laptops, iPads, etc. And for years, both moved freely by air, including in the belly holds of passenger jets. Regulators weren't completely blind to the risks. Back in 2004, the US restricted lithium metal batteries, the non-rechargeable kind, from passenger aircraft cargo. Testing showed they could burn too hot and too fast for conventional suppression systems to handle. But lithium-ion batteries, the rechargeable ones in your phone and laptop, kept moving by air for years. The working assumption was basically, if something goes wrong, the fire suppression systems will handle it. And for a while, that logic held, until it didn't. Unfortunately, it took 2 freighter accidents to force the issue. On September 3rd, 2010, UPS Flight 6, a 747 freighter carrying over 81,000 lithium batteries, departed Dubai. 22 minutes in, there's a fire warning. The crew turned back, but within minutes the fire had burned through the cargo liner, severed flight controls, and filled the cockpit with smoke so thick the pilots couldn't see. They got close to Dubai, overflying the runway at 4,500 feet before the aircraft went down. Both pilots were killed. Investigators traced the fire back to those pallets of lithium batteries. Less than a year later, Asiana Flight 991, another 747 freighter, this time out of Seoul, carrying lithium batteries alongside other dangerous goods. They experienced a fire at cruise altitude, a loss of controls, and then the aircraft broke apart mid-flight. Again, both pilots killed. Investigators never recovered the black boxes for this accident, but what they did find in the wreckage pointed to a fire near those dangerous goods pallets. A fire that had grown large enough to cause explosions that breached the fuselage itself. These accidents forced a hard regulatory response. In April of 2016, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, banned UN 3480 standalone lithium-ion batteries from passenger aircraft cargo holds entirely. Only UN 3481 batteries inside devices can still fly underneath passengers. The logic here is the lithium batteries are spread across devices, not concentrated into dense pallets, and the device casing adds a bit of protection itself. And for the batteries that still move on cargo-only aircraft, standalone lithium-ion shipments are subject to extra restrictions, including a state of charge limit of 30%, designed to reduce how much energy is available if something goes wrong. Now, this is a bit of a tangent, but the cargo areas themselves aren't really designed to handle lithium fires. Cargo compartments are all classified from A to E, each with different fire protection philosophies. Classes A and B assume that crew can get there to fight the fire. They're not really relevant here. But all of the underfloor holds on passenger jets today are Class C. They have both fire detection and halon-based fire suppression systems. There used to be a Class D. Class D was quite something. The entire philosophy of Class D was to seal the compartment with a heat-resistant lining and then starve the fire of oxygen. They didn't even install fire detection systems. Pilots literally had no way of knowing if something was burning back there because, in theory, it didn't matter. The fire would just suffocate itself. Shockingly, this didn't work out. A series of accidents in the 80s and 90s proved that fires could sustain themselves longer than expected. Liners could fail, and by the time anyone realized there was a problem, it was too late. The FAA eliminated Class D in 1998. On freighters, the main deck cargo area is generally Class E. This classification keeps the same oxygen starvation idea from Class D, but adds detection, so pilots can at least divert if/when a fire breaks out. I bring this all up because even the Class C compartments we rely on today on passenger jets weren't designed with lithium in mind. They can knock down flames with halon, but they can't pull out the heat. And, as we've covered, heat is the whole problem here with lithium batteries. Now look, for perspective here, millions of lithium batteries fly every day without incident. The probability of a thermal runaway event is genuinely low, but aviation thinks in worst cases, and unfortunately it often takes accidents to reveal where those worst cases actually are. That's how we got here with the current day cargo regulations. And as it turns out, it's a pretty similar story in the cabin. I think we've laid more than enough groundwork now. We can finally get into what's happening with the regulations inside the cabin. These rules, like most aviation safety rules, are born from both past incidents and risk assessments. But if we look at what's happening right now, the risks should probably be assessed more thoroughly than ever before. If we go all the way back to 2008, 2009, this was when aviation regulators around the world converged on two very simple strategies for dealing with these new lithium-ion batteries that were all of a sudden finding their way into devices people carried around every day. The first strategy, or rule, is if it's a spare lithium battery not built into a device, it belongs in the cabin, not in your checked bags. Lithium batteries inside devices are, under these rules, still allowed in checked baggage. And the second rule is there's a cap on how much energy you can bring on board. Batteries need to have capacities less than either 100 or 160 watt hours. Below 100 is small enough to be broadly allowed on planes. The thinking here was there's not enough potential energy to cause serious problems. This has had the unintended but interesting consequence of powerful laptops like, say, the 16-inch MacBook Pro having a battery capacity just a hair under 100 watt hours. Between 100 and 160 is okay, but this is now a special case. That'll need specific airline approval, and anything above 160 is no bueno. It's not allowed on board, and you'll have to ship this separately as a dangerous goods parcel. This has stayed as the core international baseline for how lithium batteries are treated in the cabin of passenger jets ever since. I guess just for some broader context here, the iPhone was first introduced in January of 2007. People having these devices in their pockets was still a relatively new concept. Back then, regulators weren't even thinking about power banks as a product category. They weren't even a thing most people owned. But in the decade or two that followed the introduction of these rules, power banks have become something that everybody carries with them. Literally millions are produced every year. They are everywhere. Now, it's a bit hard to sort and find specific data here, especially globally, but if we just look at FAA data from the US and focus on just power bank or battery pack related incidents per year, the rate has risen from just 1 in 2010 to 20 in 2023 alone. This is a little fuzzy and, well, just from the US, but I think this trend is still quite obvious. Power banks are becoming, or are currently, an issue. So, has this caused a big revision in the international standards? Are they handling power banks differently? Well, yes and no. The global bodies that set aviation standards, ICAO, the UN body that writes technical instructions for governments, and IATA, the industry association that publishes dangerous goods regulations, are finally updating their guidance for 2026. IATA's dangerous goods regulations now specifically say power banks should not be charged from in-seat power during flight. And ICAO's dangerous goods panel has gone further, proposing that power banks should not be placed in overhead lockers at all. They want them kept accessible, under the seat or in a seat back pocket, where they can be monitored by passengers and crew. These updates will become part of international aviation law. ICAO's technical instructions are binding on member states, and most airlines worldwide follow IATA's dangerous goods regulations. But here's the problem. Implementation is fragmented. Different countries adopt these changes at different speeds, enforcement varies wildly, and some regions are implementing their own stricter versions in response to local incidents. Take the United States. For the most part, the FAA has not implemented these changes yet. But Southwest Airlines in May of 2025 became the first major US carrier to implement a line of sight rule. If you're using a portable charger in flight, it must be visible. You can charge your phone, but the power bank can't be stuffed inside a backpack or seat pocket while it's active. News coverage at the time explicitly tied this to the growing number of lithium-ion fires worldwide. Singapore Airlines and their low-cost subsidiary Scoot banned the use of power banks in flight in April of 2025. I bring this one up purely because Scoot is the only airline I've ever flown on that has a fee to use the power outlets at your seat. I've got a Scoot video coming up in the future. Make sure you subscribe for that one. But that was literally my biggest gripe about the airline. This does, however, raise a whole other tangent that I won't really dive too deep into here. But if airlines are going to ban the use of power banks, then surely they would need to provide in-seat power. And in the case of planes not having this installed, then look, bad luck, fair enough. Please update your planes soon. But in the case of Scoot, their business model has this messed up unintended consequence of potentially pushing passengers to break the rules. I digress. Emirates went even harder with their rules. As of October 2025, they not only banned power bank use and required that power banks be kept within arm's reach, they also implemented a strict limit of 1 power bank per passenger. As of only a few days ago, literally as I'm finishing this script, the entire Lufthansa group, including Swissair, Austrian Airlines, Brussels Airlines, and Eurowings, have now banned power bank use on all flights, introduced a limit of 2 per passenger, and they must be kept accessible, not in overhead bins. Change is in the air. It's literally occurring as I speak. But these airlines aren't waiting for ICAO's proposals to become mandatory. They're reading the international guidance and deciding to go harder, faster, treating charging and overhead storage as risk multipliers that they want to eliminate now. But that's only half the story. While some airlines are voluntarily jumping ahead of the curve, not every regulatory shift is coming from this forward-thinking policy. As we touched on in the start of this video, with that Air Busan fire, regulatory bodies across Asia have moved hard and early because they experienced an accident in their own backyard. So we've now got this fragmented mess. A power bank that's perfectly fine on a Delta flight gets you turned away on Emirates. What's legal in New York fails in Seoul. What Qantas bans, United allows. And practically, these rules are going to be a nightmare to enforce. Flight attendants can't realistically monitor every passenger's bag. It relies entirely on passenger compliance, and history tells us passengers are inconsistent. Which brings us to the reality of this situation. The rules around aviation safety and security are often written in the ashes of previous incidents or accidents. As we touched on a couple of videos ago, liquid limits are all because of one terror plot. Shoes still come off a TSA due to this guy. Now look, I'm not trying to be some fear-mongering YouTuber here. Millions of people fly every day with power banks in their bags and nothing happens. The vast majority of these devices work exactly as intended. I'm still flying, you're still flying, the system for the most part works. But when you zoom out and look at the trend lines, incident rates are climbing year on year, regulations are fragmenting across the globe, and airlines are scrambling to implement their own policies. It's hard not to see where this could be heading. We could very well be one major incident away from outright bans. One fire that doesn't get contained, one thermal runaway at altitude that ends differently than the others we've seen so far. If history is any guide, that's all it would take for the conversation to shift from how should power banks be managed to should these things be allowed at all. I hope these never happen. I hope we never get there. And eventually battery technology will probably solve all of this. Solid state batteries, better thermal management systems, stricter manufacturing standards, or there could also be better technology for fighting these on board. But until then, I'll personally be looking at power banks a little differently and definitely following all of the rules. Even the ones that feel overly cautious. That's pretty much it for this video. I guess I was taking this domestic Air China flight too hot. I've got to say that flying an economy in China, at least on the major carriers, is genuinely nice. There was a full and decent meal service on this 2.5-hour flight. I'm gonna hold short of saying this is how all flying should be because that's a whole other topic that's probably good for another video. But let's just say that domestic flying in China is genuinely quite good, at least when compared to the rest of the world. Anyway, I hope you got something out of this video. I hope you learned something. If you did, I would appreciate it if you subscribed. You can follow me on Instagram here and LinkedIn here. Go check out flightformula.com. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.
Simon? Is that Simon?
What's Simon?
I've picked up a replacement. It's like $30. We've got the 3 Cs. We're good to go.